So good morning, church. I'm reading from the very beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 to 27. If you want to follow along, this is the New Living Translation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and darkness night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day.
Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day.
Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place, so dry ground may appear." And that is what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the waters seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came." And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants, and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth." And that is what happened. God made two great lights, the larger one to govern the day, and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them.
Let's dive into this morning's message. And I'm going to start with this. Did you know that Christianity is the only faith in the world that depends on miracles to be true? Islam doesn't. Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, New Ageism, none of them count on miracles as evidence of their truthfulness. Now, this became a real problem in the Enlightenment when our society decided that life is only governed by scientific law. There's no room for miracles anymore. So the Bible quickly became an archaic book where you had to basically turn off your brain to believe anything in the Bible, or you had to see miracles as sort of symbolic. Beautiful, wonderful stories, but not really factually true. As we get further into this series, A Case for Christianity, we are looking at 4 crucial questions that many of us in this room are struggling with right now. And the people that we will be mentoring will be struggling with. They are, does truth exist? We looked at that a couple weeks ago. We looked at, does God exist last week? Today we're looking at, are miracles possible? And next time, which will not be next week, I'll explain that later, is the New Testament true? Now these questions, as I said, are helpful for the mentor and the mentee because a lot of us, even if we've been Christians a long time, these questions often are in the back of our brains. Now, we've already learned that truth must exist if God exists. And we've shown good evidence that God does exist. The beginning of the universe, great evidence that God exists. The complexity of our universe, also great evidence that God exists. And the human insistence on morality, we looked at that all last week. But can miracles actually occur? The New Testament throws down the gauntlet like this. If Christ has not been raised, if the miracle of the resurrection did not happen, then all of the preaching you are listening to right now is useless. And your faith that you hold so dear right now, that got you out of bed this morning, is also useless. And we apostles, not me, Paul, and we apostles would all be lying, bunch of liars, about God. For we have said that God raised Christ from the grave. But that can't be true if there's no miracles, if there's no resurrection from the dead. And if Christ has not been raised, then your faith is useless and you are still guilty of your sins. In that case, all who have died believing in Christ are lost. Now, just as a side, before I move on, you might be a little confused at why Paul is putting forgiveness of sins with the resurrection. That's because the resurrection was confirmation that Christ's work on the cross was accepted by the Father. So if there is no resurrection, then Jesus was just a dude who died on a cross, among thousands of other people who died on Roman crosses. But the resurrection was a stamp of approval by the Father. Confirmation that Jesus did exactly what he came to do. So in short, without miracles, there is no Christianity. Without miracles, you are wasting your time today. The Bible describes 3 great periods of miracles. There was the Exodus, the prophets, and Jesus and the apostles. These were about a 1,500-year period. And if you averaged out, I didn't do the math on this, I had to read this, this is good. If you averaged out every miracle in the Bible in that 1,500-year period, you'd get one miracle every 8 years for the whole country. The chances of you actually seeing a miracle yourself with your own eyeballs, pretty slim. One miracle every 8 years. Are miracles possible? I think it all depends on the very first verse of the book. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So what we have here is a picture of an intelligent being creating something separate from him. We're going to call it a box. He created a box. Well, let's pretend the universe is a box. So God created the box. But God is not the box, not like in movies like Avatar or pantheism or panentheism. God can exist apart from the box and is not dependent on the box. Miracles are God reaching into the box to do what he wants, which he has the ability to do and the right to do. Now, if there is no God, the box is closed. There are no miracles possible. If God is the box, I'm still wrapping my head around this one, honestly. If God is the box, then everything is miraculous and nothing is miraculous, all in the same time, in a sense. If there is a God, the box is open. Now, why do I say it all depends on this first verse? Are miracles possible? If you get by Genesis 1:1, miracles have to be possible. Because if God is powerful enough, and that's why we read through most of the first chapter, thank you, Gloria, for reading that whole first chapter. God says, I want there to be light. Boom, light. I want there to be life. Boom, there's light. I want to separate light from the darkness. And it just happens. Someone who can do that, how difficult is it to part the Red Sea? How difficult is it to have a global flood? Child's play. A man surviving 3 days in a fish? Amateur hour. Right? That's nothing. If you can get past Genesis 1:1 and go, I believe that God created the heavens and the earth, everything that follows is very plausible. Now, there are two common objections to miracles. And some of us may be objecting even right now. You're saying, but Pastor, what about scientific law? What if everything in the box is governed by nature? And there's four main laws in nature: gravity, magnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. I'm not about to explain them because I don't understand them. Scientific laws describe what normally happens after countless observations. These laws are descriptive. They describe what has happened up to this point, but they are not prescriptive, saying it must always be this way. The scientific method, and this is really important for our discussion today, remember these two things. The scientific method counts on two things: repetition and observation. Repetition and observation. Let's talk about repetition. Things need to be repeated. We know that some things happen only once. I'll give you 3 examples of things we know only happen once. The start of the universe only happened once. The beginning of life only happened once. And the beginning of new life only happened once for each species. The Big Bang happened once. It's not observable today. It cannot be repeated in a test tube. And we believe our lives believing that exceptions can occur. Let me give you a real down-to-earth example. Miranda buys lottery tickets every Friday. Miranda's been buying lottery tickets every Friday for 45 years. Has never won the lottery. The law would be Miranda cannot win the lottery. How do you know? Because she's never won the lottery. The next week, Miranda wins the lottery. No one in this room would say she should return that money because the law says Miranda cannot win the lottery. We live our lives believing that exceptions can occur. One of the things that amazes me is when you look out on a cloudy day, maybe not quite like this, but you see cloud formations, you'll never see that again. It's unique every time. Clouds will never form in quite that same way again. It happens once. Historic events only happen once. Just because miracles are rare, in other words, they only happen once, does not make them impossible. The great thinker C.S. Lewis said these great words. He said, if we admit God, Genesis 1:1, if we admit God, must we admit miracle? Indeed, indeed, you have no security against it. That is the bargain. If you believe in God, you have to believe in miracles. Now, miracles are outside the realm of the scientific method because they are unobservable to everyone and unrepeatable. And yet exceptions to scientific law are everywhere. One of the scientific laws is gravity. Drop a ball and it's going to go to the ground. But you, as an intelligent being, can reach out and stop the ball from dropping. Now, if you and I, as somewhat intelligent beings, can interrupt that law, why can't God interrupt that law, scientific law? So, repetition. Now let's get into observation. Some people would say, if I can't see it, if I didn't observe it, it didn't happen. You know what? I didn't see any of you get out of bed this morning. But I'm virtually certain it happened. Because you're here. There's all kinds of things that you and I believe in that we don't actually see ourselves. I've been told that there's a place in this world called New Zealand. I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen pictures and videos of, but pictures and videos can be manipulated. I've never actually stood in New Zealand. Never seen it with my own eyes, but I believe it exists. And you probably do too, because you have good reason to believe that it exists. We often believe in things that we can't see. I believe in oxygen. Can't see oxygen. On a more philosophical level, you and I will probably believe in love. Can't see love. You can see the effects of love, but you can't see love, yet we believe in it. Only the open box concept is unbiased towards the evidence. Like miracles I've never seen myself. A closed box cannot even hear the evidence. A closed box idea is more closed-minded, limited, narrow, and restrained. For those biased against miracles, miracles can never happen because they have determined beforehand they are impossible. This is circular reasoning and illogical. That miracle never happened because miracles don't happen. I know this because miracles don't happen. Therefore, that miracle couldn't have happened. I know this because miracles can't happen. On, around it goes. Right? All right. Objection number 2. Primitive thinking. You know, some people will say, well, you know, there are miracles in the Bible because all those people were pre-scientific. They were prone to superstition. This is what some call chronological snobbery. It means we believe in 2024 in Nanaimo, we are ever so much smarter than our ancestors. Those poor saps, they don't know nothing, but we got it down. Oh yeah, we're so much smarter. But even in the Bible, there is great skepticism towards miracles. Did you notice that? If you've ever read it. I'll just give you a brief little list. Pharaoh was unconvinced by miracles. The Hebrew people were unconvinced by miracles. The first thing they did is set up a golden calf when they got across the water. The Philistines weren't convinced by miracles, even though their god Dagon fell down in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Jezebel heard about fire from the sky, was not convinced. The Pharisees saw Jesus perform miracles right in front of them. They were not convinced. Zachariah, John the Baptist's dad, was told about this miraculous baby that they were going to have, and he didn't. He had doubts. He didn't believe. Mary had doubts. The disciples, after seeing Jesus risen from the dead, had doubts. Why are they unconvinced? Because of scientific law. These things don't usually happen this way. Zachariah doubted because his wife was old. This may be news to you. Old women do not give birth to chubby pink babies. He was just as skeptical as you and I would be. Mary doubted because virgins don't get pregnant. I'm not about to explain why right now. The disciples doubted the resurrection because dead people stay dead. But this is good news for us because it shows that doubts are common. And having doubts is not a deal breaker. Some of us need to hear that today because you're riddled with doubt. It's not a deal breaker. You're in good company. All kinds of people in the Bible had many doubts, even when the evidence was right in front of them. I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's look at them a little more closely. The Hebrew people. Moses said to the Hebrew people, he said, you saw how the Lord your God cared for you all along the way as you traveled through the wilderness, just as a father cares for his child. Now he has brought you to this place. But even after all he did, you refused to trust. Now, I want you to pay very careful attention to that word. That's going to be very important as in this discussion. You refuse to trust the Lord your God, who goes before you looking for the best places to camp, guiding you with a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. In other words, this whole group of people saw this amazing miracle. Could you imagine? A ball of fire at night and a pillar of cloud by day and guiding them towards food and water. Did that miracle convince them? Well, yes and no. Did it convince them that God existed? Maybe. Did it convince them to trust him? No. It did not. Let's go on to the writer of Psalms, Psalm 78, talking about this time. It says, they did not keep God's covenant and refused to live by his instructions. They forgot what he had done, the great wonders he had shown them, the miracles he did for their ancestors. Despite his wonders, they refused to trust him. They refused to trust him. Miracles did not convince the Hebrew people to trust God. Believe in God, perhaps, yes, but not to believe God. They forgot what he had done. Miracles are sadly soon forgotten. They have a short shelf life. We humans have tendency to have the attitude, what have you done for me lately? Right? I can say that because I have that same attitude. Let's take a look at Jesus for a moment. Jesus performed many miracles, what the Bible called signs. And then in an author's note, in John chapter 12, he writes, despite all the miraculous signs Jesus had done, most of the people still did not believe in him. Most. Saw it right in front of them. Still did not believe. This is not a ringing endorsement for the power of witnessing miracles. And Jesus said there are consequences for seeing miracles and not believing. He said, if I hadn't done such miraculous signs among them that no one else could do, they would not be guilty. But as it is, they have seen with their own eyeballs everything I did, yet they still hate me and my Father. This fulfills what is written in their scriptures. They hated me without cause. If miracles are often unconvincing, not always unconvincing, but often unconvincing, why do them? Well, you might not know this, but the miracles of Jesus were not meant to that wasn't just him showing off. Hey, look at me, look at the stuff I can do. Isn't that cool? They were meant to show something. They were meant to show that he has power over the 4 problems that plague us all: sin, sickness, nature, and death. Essentially, he wanted to show his power over the things that are wrong in this world and to point us towards the kingdom. He turned the water into wine as this is his first sign. Did you notice that when it talks about that? This is his first sign. What's this a sign of? It's a sign that the kingdom is a place of abundance. He calmed the sea to show us that the kingdom is a place where we do not fight against nature anymore. He healed sickness to show us that in the kingdom our bodies will not break down. Isn't that good news for some of us? That our bodies will not fight against us anymore. And he raised the dead as a sign that in the kingdom we will never die. They're all signs. This is Bertrand Russell, famous atheist from decades ago. And he was asked, what would you say if you suddenly found yourself standing before God? Many of you already know what he said. He said, Not enough evidence, sir. Defiant to the end. Not enough evidence. And you know what? Some of us in this room may be feeling a little bit that way too. There's not enough evidence. And you know what? You might be mentoring someone who's struggling with not enough evidence. If only God would prove himself, then I'd believe. If only when my rent was due, a gold bar appeared on my kitchen table. If only my diabetes would disappear one day and be verified by a doctor. If only my spiritually lost children, who I pray for every day, were all visited by angels one night and got baptized the next day, then I'd believe that God exists. But you see the problem with that line of thinking. We think God just wants us to believe he exists. That the Bible is about convincing us that God is real. God doesn't just want us to acknowledge his existence. The whole point of the Bible is God is desiring a relationship with us. He wants to be one with us, in covenant with us, in a love relationship, in a trust relationship. The Bible is not a fact-filled textbook to convince us that God is real. It is an invitation for us to know him, to experience him, to love him. James says, you say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. This is a fact to you, that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. It's very sobering to think, you know who else believes that God exists? Demons. Demons believe that God exists. They know. Do they trust him? No. When the Bible tells us to believe in him, it doesn't simply mean that we admit he exists out there somewhere. It's a calling for us to trust him. Faith, trust, and believe. Whenever you see those words, they kind of mean the same thing. It's all relational. It's God calling us into relationship. The Pharisees believed that God existed, but they didn't trust Jesus, which is essential to knowing God. They believed that God existed, but they didn't believe him. They trusted God existed, but they didn't trust him, like so many today. Christianity is about relationship with God, not a tip of the hat or courteous bow as we go our separate ways. So let me ask you some questions about trust. Do you trust God's description of his love for you, his power, his plan to save you? In other words, do you trust that God is not a liar? That's essential. I don't know about you. I'm not friends with a lot of people I assume are lying to me. I assume you're the same, right? Do you trust God will save you because of the life Jesus lived, the death he died in your place? In other words, do you trust he wants you with him? You. Not the person next to you. Don't worry about the person next to you. Do you believe God wants you with him? Last one. Do you trust God enough that you want him in charge of you for all eternity? In other words, do you trust he wants the best for you? See, miracles can convince you that God exists, but they will not necessarily make you trust him. So, let's sum up what we have learned so far. The beginning of the universe is the first miracle, and the scientific method cannot replicate it for study. Those who deny miracles are standing in one. Number two, if God exists, miracles like the beginning of the universe and many more are easily plausible. It's just God reaching into the box. Number three, Christianity depends on miracles to be true, especially the resurrection. And we need to be unapologetic about a God who is very involved and powerful and loving. All three of those, by the way, are good reasons for him to reach into the box on occasion. Number 4, miracles alone do not create trust in God. And those who say they need to believe or need to see to believe likely won't believe even after seeing. Usually not because the evidence is not there, but because they don't want it to be true. The resurrection is the smoking gun of God's existence and gives tremendous evidence that miracles are plausible. Now, some have said, and actually was alluded to here earlier, I did not plan that, some have said a great miracle is the reconciliation between God and humans. The fact that you and I, and this is hard to believe for some of us, but the fact that you and I, if we are followers of Jesus, can now love who started off as a natural enemy to us. That right now, many of us in this room love a natural enemy, and that person is God. That is a miracle. And many of you have experienced that miracle. And only because God pursued you and spoke to you in a way that you could hear without being overwhelmed, and you began a loving and trusting relationship with that former enemy. And if you believe God, the one described in the Bible, who is all-powerful, all-knowing, immaterial, eternal, you must believe in miracles. Because God is fully capable of reaching into the box to do as he pleases. Are miracles possible? If God exists, they have to be possible. That's what C.S. Lewis was telling us. And that's what Genesis 1:1 alludes to. It's the setup. If you believe Genesis 1:1, miracles are definitely possible. We're about to remember the Lord's table. As I was preparing for this time, I thought that one of the greatest miracles is this: that despite my many failures and your many failures, and God knows the ones that you and I haven't even done yet, God still loves you and gave everything to win you back. That is an amazing miracle. You know, in a love relationship, it requires two people to say, I'll change for you. I'll sacrifice for you. I'll serve you. If only one in that relationship is doing that, that's an exploitive relationship. Only in Christianity is there a God who's willing to adapt for us, sacrifice for us, serve us. That kind of love is supernatural. It's miraculous. It's not explained by natural law, by scientific law. In scientific law, the strong eats the weak. Right? Survival of the fittest. But in God's law, the strong serve the weak. We know what real love is, John writes, because Jesus gave up his life for us. You want to know what real love looks like? It's the cross, which is one of the reasons we keep coming back to the cross, because I'm convinced that every week a whole flock of people comes through the front door, including myself, who needs to be reminded of how precious they are to God. And maybe here this morning, you're not going to remember anything about miracles or anything about Genesis 1:1. You're not going to hear anything. But what I want you to experience is God's love this morning. That as we go to the table, you are reminded once again that to God you are infinitely valuable. Infinitely valuable. Every single one of you. So I'm going to get you to get up out of your chair, go to the station that's closest to you. If you can't get up, put your hand up. Someone will come to you. And I want you to just be open. Say, God, remind me once again of your love for me. Remind me once again. Go ahead. Lord, I pray for those who are here today who are struggling with doubt. Doubt about miracles, doubt about you. Lord, may you speak to them in this moment. And for all those who have come through those doors, having been beat up this week, having been criticized or rejected or just ignored. Lord, may you remind them in this moment, by the power of your Spirit, that they are precious to you, that you are with them always. For those who have yet to repent and turn to you and start that relationship with you, Lord, may now be the moment. May they sense your nearness. May they sense you calling them to come home. This represents Christ's body that was broken for you because he loves you. Take and eat. This juice represents the blood of the new covenant, spilled because he loves you. Take and drink.